Go ahead and turn to 2 Timothy 2, and I'll get there in just a moment. 2 Timothy 2. But today we're going to start looking at some unbiblical worldviews. I touched on these in the past. Today we're going to look at secular humanism. And secular humanism is something we're probably bombarded with the most. Every TV show you watch probably has some aspect of secular humanism. Every news, even on the news radio, we have their aspect is coming from secular humanism. What other things? We have books that we read. In our government school system, that's usually the aspect they're coming from is secular humanism. So if you look over at 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 22 to 26, it tells us, "Flee also useful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace, and them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. But foolish and unlearned questions avoid, knowing that they do gender strife. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient, and meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves. If God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging of the truth, and that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will." So we see a few things here that Christians ought to take note of. The first one is flee. It doesn't just say stay around and talk to people, stay around and be tempted. No, flee. Stay away from sinful things. The more we flee these things, the more that we can avoid the snare of the devil. Be gentle to people who may not agree with us. You know, a lot of us, at least myself, we were raised in church, right? We've heard these things all our lives, but then you have people who have never heard this. I know of people who moved here from other countries, they never heard the real story of Jesus, right? That's shocking to me, but it is true. People haven't heard a lot of things that we have learned growing up in church. So we need to be patient with them. Be willing to teach them. Take our time. Don't just try to argue with somebody. No, really teach them. Listen to them, and then hopefully if they're respectful enough to listen to us. You know, we've shown a lot of videos lately. Some of the videos, people were respectful to each other. They did listen. And others, there's lots of arguing and bickering going on. But we want to sit back and be the better person and listen and reach them. That's the best way to reach somebody, is to be kind, right? Who wants to listen to somebody yell at you being mean to you? Be kind and teach them. That's what the Bible tells us. And so I want you to hear the testimony. Some of you may be familiar with Frank Pastore. He was a former Cincinnati Reds pitcher. And he was a secular humanist. And so this is the first part of his story, and we'll hear the end of it at the conclusion of this today.
You know, I was probably a lot like a lot of you guys that are here this afternoon. I spent a lot of my life trying to avoid events like this rather than trying to get to them. I grew up in high school thinking that the purpose and the meaning of life was to get rich and famous, to accumulate all the right stuff on the outside so that you can be happy and fulfilled on the inside. And so coming out of Damien High School, I set out to get rich and famous. And so I signed with the Cincinnati Reds at the time and set out for riches, fame, and glory, because I thought that's what would bring happiness and fulfillment to my life if I just got the right kind of stuff. 3.5 years later, I find myself on the mound at Riverfront Stadium, relieving my boyhood idol, Tom Seaver, pitching to Johnny Bench. The defense that day against the San Francisco Giants was, of course, Johnny Bench catching, Dan Dreesen at first, Joe Morgan, David Concepcion, George Foster, Ray Knight, Ken Griffey, his dad, and Cesar Geronimo. And it was an awesome experience for someone that had dreamed their entire life about getting to the big leagues, to be playing on a team with perhaps 4 or 5 Hall of Famers. The great Big Red Machine was now something that I was a part of, and it was a total rush to be there. Much like being a little kid waiting for the wonderful Christmas presents to open out by the tree. And I didn't know that life is just like that. You always think it's the next car, the next relationship, the next whatever it is that's going to bring you happiness. And there was a reason our founders said it was the pursuit of happiness, because you never really arrive until you find Jesus. I didn't know that. However, I did hang out with a group of guys that seemed to, at least they said that they had the answer. And they were actually, in all honesty, the only people my wife would let me hang around with, and they were, of course, the Christians. So I hung out with these guys for 5 seasons, and they had always wanted me to come up into their room after the games and break open the Word and share with me, and I learned really quick that that was just Christian lingo for answer questions you're not asking. And so 5 seasons go by of these guys asking, wanting to, quote, share Jesus with me. And I got to tell you, what the real reality of it was is I didn't believe there really was a Jesus. I'm a product of the California government schools and a liberal Catholic high school. There was no Jesus of history. It was just a Christ of faith, and he's whoever you create when you want to have a religious experience. And so I grew up in an atheistic household. The only time I went to church was to check out the chicks during communion, and I had a couple losing streaks in the minor leagues, and I went to chapel and figured, hey, there might be something to it. But I never believed that it was true and real, and I learned really quick how to shut these Christians up. You simply ask them some questions. How do you know God exists? How do you know Jesus rose from the dead? Why should I believe the Bible? Doesn't it contradict itself all over the place? Don't the cities of the Old Testament and the New Testament don't exist? Hasn't archaeology shown them to be false? I mean, why don't you guys read a book and enter the 20th century and realize all that exists is matter and motion, life is a pain, and then you die, there's no life after death, and that's what I believe to be true and real, and these guys want to share with me, and the sad thing is, they simply couldn't answer my questions.
They couldn't answer his questions. Well, some of those questions we've already answered the last few weeks is why do we know the Bible's true? And then some of the other questions he talks about, I'm going to cover today. And one of the first things you'll hear from a secular humanist is that man has simply evolved. You know, we're just here, right? But we know this is false. Why we know this? Because the Bible tells us this in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created, and in verses 26 through 28 of Genesis 1, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish, and of the sea, and of the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And then in chapter 2, verses 7, it tells us, and the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And then the last part of chapter 2 tells us this about Eve, Genesis 2, 22 and 23. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And God said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Clearly, God created man. We didn't evolve from anything. This is my dad. I told you about him before. And we're going to watch a video. It's about 6 minutes, and it's really not a debate. It's a big argument between professors from UC and my dad and a preacher. And I'll give you a little background about this story. Like I said, my dad was a pastor, and it was a Wednesday night about 3 or 4 o'clock. He got a phone call from some cameraman he knew, and he said, hey, Dr. Terrell, there's a debate coming on our TV show tonight, and these guys are 2 professors from UC are going to debate this preacher who's a good preacher, but he doesn't really know science. Can you come down here? And my dad's like, well, no, I got church tonight. Can't help you out. Guy calls him back 20 minutes later, Dr. Terrell, I can't find anybody else. This is not going to look too good on TV. Can you please come? And so my dad relented. He got someone else to cover a service tonight, and he went down there. And so we're going to watch this. And there's a ponytail professor on here. You guys saw him last week. I didn't know this, and I didn't know Lisa then, but that was one of her professors at UC. In fact, he still works there now even. So, but here it is. And like I said, it gets a little heated, and things are going back and forth, so just try to keep up.
Ask you here, Gail, how would you disprove, if you will, those who would say, as have been said here by the professors, that we, as the inhabitants of this world, all of us, plant and animal and human and the like, have evolved from a common matter?
Oh, there's nothing to support that. That's pure speculation. If you can make up almost any story you want and say, how do you disprove it? Let's talk about what we can prove.
All right, what can you prove?
We can prove that there are limits and barriers to the change through which a creature may go. We've bred dogs, we've bred horses, we've bred cattle, we've bred all kinds of creatures down through the centuries. We have records that go back thousands of years. And from cattle, you get cattle. From horses, you get horses. From dogs, you get dogs. There is never any indication that one kind of creature, whether in a micro change or you say that's not true, but there's no scientific evidence that that's not true.
But are wolves and dogs different, really?
They're the same kind. They're the dog kind.
Let me read another passage. Let me read one more verse for you.
All right, read it quickly.
That will clear this up. 1 Corinthians 15:39. All flesh is not the same, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds.
All right, so let's take that and say, is there any scientific fossil type proof that a bird became an animal, or a fish became a man, or an animal became a man?
All right, well, let's stick with the canids for a minute. The canids are carnivorous mammals, the dogs, coyote, and wolves. And here's a good example of, I think that both Gail and Walter would recognize a wolf as something, a different species than a dog.
Not a different kind of creature. We can have variety within a kind of creature.
We have different names for that.
Same kind of creature.
Well, then you could say that a black...
Are they all canines, though?
What
These are different species.
Here's an error of biology. Here's an error of modern biology.
But you're saying that they're all canines. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying they're all the dog kind. I'm not going to use the modern biology terminology because it's a great error of modern biology to try and classify according to general appearance. The way we should classify living organisms in modern biology, and a number of Canadian biologists are now doing this, is by reproductive characteristics. There is a defined difference by reproduction.
Dogs and wolves are entirely different. They have different social
behavior. Dogs and wolves can reproduce together. They are not different organisms.
No. Let's talk about mongoloid. Listen, just a second. Let's talk about mongoloid, negroid, and caucasoid, the three different species of human beings.
If they can mate, they're all the same human
That's too
kind.
loaded.
They couldn't do now.
Sure,
Sir, and before you even leave that, the biologists who are creationists, such as myself, we look at the similarities in existing creatures, such as you just proposed, and find rather there's design. For example, this skull and this skull are somewhat similar in terms of the chemical makeup. If you look at it microscopically, you can see great similarities.
This is an ancient argument.
Wait, let me finish now first, all right? But the similarities demonstrate that there is an engineer who designed them to share this earth, share the food, share the chemicals.
Right.
There will be, for example, automobiles are very similar to a truck. But to propose that an automobile will evolve into a truck because a truck may be larger and more complex is utterly ridiculous. And the same thing's true here. The similarities do not indicate in any fashion that one kind of creature will ever change into a different kind of creature as proposed by the evolution.
And how do you account for man's ability to rationale? I mean, you know, he's a rational.
Right. Let's hear the answer.
Okay, so there's two questions here. One was, how do you take similarity to reconstruct genealogy? And basically, the basic prediction.
I didn't ask that question.
Okay,
you
well,
proposed the question.
All right, go ahead.
I didn't ask it.
He didn't ask.
Go ahead.
So that is the question.
The basic prediction.
The similarities that you're talking about, just as clearly, and I think even more clearly, based on what we know from reproductive characteristics, demonstrate that the reason they're similar is because they're designed to share the earth. All large creatures are going to have similar muscles to move a skeletal structure if they're going to stand upright. The similarities give no indication that one kind of creature is by ancestral relationship
let's go back to your example.
Another kind of
let's
creature.
go back to your example.
There are limits
Hold
to
on,
the
guys,
boundaries
you
of
answered my
change.
question. Then you're saying that, and I'm bringing it down very simple, that we are not descendants from apes. We simply share a similar skeletal structure and muscular structure.
Some similarities.
Because
With
we
all
they can
large
stand
creatures,
upright.
With all large, because
But there's
the
no-
design was we share the like
Cockroaches have eyes.
Well, let's go to
humans
the
have eyes.
automobile.
Just like automobiles all have tires
let's
because
go
they're
to your
designed to share
let's
the
go to your
road.
example.
We all have
I'm going to
blades.
talk about your example of automobile and truck. It's an interesting analogy, and you drew it. I'd have to study it. I don't know the details of the history, but I would be prepared to argue that, yes, either the truck evolved from the automobile or vice versa. That is, there are patterns that are associated with the process of engineering that led from one to the other. In essence,
No, but one will not change into another. We're talking about a created
of course
entity.
it doesn't.
You
don't see a monkey turn to a human before your eyes. I mean, it's a process.
Is this your argument that if a professor walks into a classroom with a worm in his hand and lays it on the table and tells the students, in 3 seconds this worm will turn into a man?
Of course.
We'd be laughed at. So you say, no, in millions of years this worm will turn into a man. It's the same argument. Millions of years, 3 seconds.
Not the same argument.
Uniformitarianists who are
Well,
evolutionists.
most evolutionists are not uniformitarianists.
Most
Once again, you're
evolutionists that
misrepresenting.
I have ever read.
Well, you obviously don't know that.
I was taught to be an evolutionist at UC. I was taught evolutionary uniformitarianism and humanism.
All right. Again,
It was a very bigoted and biased education.
Hold on just a minute. Hold on just a minute.
I don't teach
Let your response. Respond, please.
Well, we were talking about transitional forms. Before we get too far away, I wanted to provide, if I could, two. The first is Archaeopteryx, which provides a beautiful transitional form between reptiles and birds. Archaeopteryx is known from about 130 million years ago in the strata, radiocarbon dating.
You can't radiocarbon date 130 million years. You
I'm
have to
sorry,
use uranium, potassium, or uranium lead. You can't use
Thank you very
carbon
much.
dating.
This guy probably did get his degree in this. Okay.
Absolutely. All right, go ahead.
Okay, isotope.
So it probably won't surprise you, my dad had lots of debates canceled that he had scheduled years ago. He had debates scheduled at the University of Wilmington College, and had flyers all over campus. And this is really before the internet was as big as it is now. And he got a phone call, hey, this is canceled. The professor started finding out who you were. They didn't want to debate you. And there was another time at Miami, Ohio, he was asked to come to speak to a student group. And it wasn't a debate, it was just my dad's time. And he's sitting there giving his speech, and he's getting heckled during his speech. And finally somebody spoke up and said, I need to apologize. Our professors are heckling you. It wasn't the students, it was the professors. So my dad says to professors, you know, you get these students for 4 years. I get them for 1 hour, and you're concerned about what I'm going to teach them in 1 hour. You get them for 4 years. So, everything happens by chance and mistake. You know the story of Joseph, right? Just happened by chance and mistake. He happened to be the guy who happened to be sold into slavery instead of being killed by his brothers. He happened to become ruler of a land that saved an entire nation from hunger. It just happened by chance. You know, but Genesis 50:20 tells us differently. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring it to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. You know that story. If you don't know that story, read it. Genesis 37 through 50. It's amazing. I mean, I need to read it again. It's a great story. Matthew 10, 29 and 31 tells us, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore, ye are more valued than many sparrows. God knows everything about the sparrows, much less us. I don't know the hairs on my head. Some of you guys might know the hair on your head, but but I don't. Luke 8, 23 through 35 tells us, but as they sailed, he fell asleep, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water, and they were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said unto them, where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, what manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and the water, and they obey him. He commands the winds and the water. If he commands that, there's no chance, and there's no accidents. Nothing happens by random chance. There's no right and wrong. Moral relativism, we've talked about this for the first few weeks. But isn't it odd that in math, 2 plus 2 is always 4? If you go to the store and have 2 items that are $25 a piece, you can't tell the cashier, hey, I'm going to pay you $25 because 25 plus 25 is still 25. You can't do that. That's, we know there is truth. And it's not whatever you believe is right. It's whatever the Bible tells us is right. And if 2 things are opposite of each other, then somebody's got to be wrong. But a secular humanist believes that individual creates their own reality. Whatever you believe is good for you, whatever I believe is good for me. You may wonder why I have some bananas up here with some shoes, and you're going to see about that in a minute. But in Isaiah chapter 5, in verses 20 through 25, I'll read that here. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink, which justify the wicked for reward, and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the host, and despises the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against his people, and he hath stretched forth his hand against them, and hath smitten them. And the hills did tremble, and the carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. For all his anger is not turned away, but his hand stretches out still. So even these people that are going out against God and preaching and teaching against him, God still says, my hand's stretching out for you. Like Kurt mentioned a few weeks ago, there is some point where that does go away. But right here, God's taking all these people rejecting him, he still says, my hand is still here. Come and admit the gospel is true. So this is a clip. This is what has to do with the bananas and the shoelaces. This is Todd Friel. I've showed a couple of his videos in the past, but this one's from my video called Beyond the Shadow of Doubt.
Up until the latter part of the 20th century, when the postmodern mindset kicked into full gear, which says all truth is valid truth. There is no one truth. All truth is equal truth. Young people, you're going to run into that if you haven't already. It sounds like this. You can believe what you want to believe, and I'll believe what I believe, and they can be completely contradictory, and they're both right. And if you've never heard this before, and you've said, oh, I've heard sermons on postmodernism, whatever, this is just some philosophical nonsense I don't need to concern myself with. Oh, well, yes, you do, because it is as bizarre as you can imagine. Postmodernism sounds like this. Let's roll the next clip.
Believe in your own thought, and are you right? Do you believe you're right?
Yes, I do.
All right, I believe I'm right in my own belief. So that makes us both right. No. I have no objection to what you think.
I didn't ask that. You think I'm wrong.
Whatever you think can be right for yourself.
Listen, I believe the complete opposite of you. Am I wrong?
No.
Say it. Come on.
No.
It doesn't hurt.
You have a different belief.
Say it.
No, you're not wrong.
I don't believe the same thing as you.
All right.
So I must be wrong, right?
Why does there have to be a right and wrong to everything?
How come there has to be a right and wrong to everything?
If I tie my shoe different than you, am I wrong?
We're not talking about tying shoes.
So? We aren't talking about physical objects. We're talking about a belief. Can you hold the belief in your hand and see it?
Well, we are talking about some physical things.
No. See, my shoelace is not like a belief.
I think that your shoelace is a banana peel.
All right.
Right? It's a shoelace. It's not a banana peel.
So you're dumb.
Great, then say it. Say it.
Wrong.
It's okay.
Believe it.
I'm not wrong to believe it?
You were told the banana peel was yellow, or whatever color it was, and you eat a banana, all right? Typically a banana's yellow, and you peel it and eat it.
Yeah.
All right? But you were told that. You were told the color blue was blue. It could be black for all you know.
Ah, so it's either the truth or it's not. So you think it's the truth.
Reality is inside your head.
Yeah, reality is inside your head. That's fascinating, man. All right, can you do other amazing things inside of your head? Can you make people fly?
You'll never know.
You're right.
You're not me and I'm not you.
Right.
It's that simple.
This is the similar mindset that this fellow has. Reality is in your mind. No, it's not. It is either real or it isn't. Now, I believe this is a bench. If you believe that it is a watermelon, what is it? A bench or a watermelon?
No, but if you grew up colorblind and you thought blue was brown your whole life and you were told it was blue, you'd think it was blue and you'd believe it true to your heart.
If someone told you that was a watermelon, you'd believe it was a watermelon.
Told me that there's a different way of looking at it. Okay, you should examine the claims. Stop. I can't even stop. I can't even listen to this anymore. Oh, anybody Isaiah 5. Woe unto those who say evil is good and good is evil, that up is down, that down is up. Ah! We're living in that mindset right now. I can't convince them that the big marble thing I was standing on was a bench and not a watermelon. It's the postmodern mindset. And we're supposed to come along now and say that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, the life. And then they turn and say, well, that's just because you interpret the Bible literally.
Now you know why that previous verse says to be patient. I probably would have been that kind, I don't know. So,
I wonder how that conversation would go with their college
exactly.
when they take a test and they're grading the test. Well, all the answers are right.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Yeah. And maybe it is working because we have a lot of uneducated college people, it seems to be. But, all right, so next, there is no spiritual world. Secular humanists seem to believe in naturalism, which just means it's a natural world. We're here now, and when we die, we're dead. Humans are no different than animals, and so, who kind of cares what's going on? But John 4:24 tells us differently. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Ephesians 6:12 tells us, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. There's definitely a spiritual and a natural world. Man does not have an eternal soul. There's no life after death. Hebrews 9:27 tells us, and as is appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. Now we looked at Revelation 20 last week, but let me read this again. Revelation 20 verses 11 and 12. And I saw a great white throne and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were open, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. We know there's a judgment. We saw the excellent video with Paul Washer giving us great detail about that judgment. But we know for certain there's a judgment, and we still must witness and reach those people with the gospel. So the biggest meaning in life you're going to get from an unbeliever is just to serve yourself, right? Serve the state. You know, that's the biggest thing we're going to get from them. But Ephesians 2:10 tells us differently. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Ecclesiastes 12:13 tells us, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And I know you guys don't have your booklets, but this happens to be question number 3 in the booklet that I gave you guys. For what primary purpose is mankind created? And that's 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. The meaning of life is to honor God and to follow Jesus Christ. That's our meaning. Reach others with the gospel. That's why we're here. Man has no free will. He's just a product of his environment. We see this a lot in the media. Somebody kills somebody, and what's the first thing you hear? How'd they get that gun? Well, who pulled the trigger? Ought to be the first question. How'd they get it? Maybe second or third. But the media wants to just immediately blame something else other than the person who was the perpetrator, right? Oh, they were raised this way. They didn't have money. They were poor. They didn't know any better. Yeah, they did know better. They have just suppressed the truth, right? And they just don't understand that man's will is to first sin against God. And that's their biggest problem. They need the gospel. And I do agree, certainly the people you surround you with in your life and how you're raised, that does affect you. But at some point, it's your responsibility. We're born knowing what sin is. Romans chapter 7, verses 18 through 20 tells us, for I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Now I do that I would not. It is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. This is Paul talking, right? He wrote, half the New Testament? And this is the man saying, I don't do the things I should do. And this is the man whose testimony is obviously amazing. This is a man that literally was murdering Christians on his way to murder more Christians, and the Lord saved him before he got there. So this is a man who obviously, if he has those problems, then we all do too. And that's why we need to stick to the Bible and keep following Jesus. So here's the 7 things I cover. I got some more things here. But man was not created, but evolved. Everything happens by chance or mistake. No right and wrong, moral relativism. There's no spiritual world. Man doesn't have an eternal soul. There's no life after death. Life has no ultimate meaning. Man has no free will, just a product of his environment. So those are just kind of, in general, secular humanism thoughts. So let me read you the conclusion of Frank Pastore's testimony. This is from his book, Shattered. And so, it was a clear blue day in Dodger Stadium, perfect for baseball, and my life was perfect too. At age 26, I had been pitching for the Cincinnati Reds for 5 years. I had a beautiful wife, a young son, and a baby on the way. The cars, the condos, and the cash of a good life in the fast lane. My dreams had come true. I was cruising to a 3-1 victory with 2 outs in the 8th inning. I threw a 2-1 fastball on the outside the plate, something I had done 1,000 times before. It's odd how life can change forever in the blink of an eye. My pitch was 91 miles an hour as Dodger Steve Sachs swung. The ball's impact exerted roughly 8,000 pounds of force on the bat in 1/100th of a second. The violent collision compressed the ball, changed the direction, and packed with kinetic energy, rocketing through the air at about 132 miles per hour. The baseball covered 60 feet 6 inches from home plate to the pitcher's mound in less than 1/8 of a second. I didn't have time to blink. As the ball blurred toward my head, I instinctively threw up my right arm to protect my face. If I hadn't, the ball would have split my forehead, and it's unlikely I would be writing this book, since I'd be dead. The ball exploded against my right elbow like a hammer hitting a glass bottle.
They called the owners in Cincinnati. They said, yeah, get him back here. I flew back to Cincinnati, and yeah, it was bad. They had just invested a big contract in me, and now I couldn't pitch. And long story short, Tommy Hume, who was the chapel leader, called me from Houston. It was a Sunday afternoon game, and the guys were going to play golf as they often do, flying west to east on Monday. And some of the guys were going to go do that. And so Hume called and just said, hey, you want to ride along in the cart and stuff? And I'd always found a reason not to go after the first time when they wanted to, quote, share with me and have fellowship. And I went to say, no, of course not. And a voice just like mine went, sure, I'll be there. So we go to the house and the condo, and they do the hot dog and the hamburger thing. And so we sit down, and this is going to be my first Bible study. And I know all about the Bible. I know it contradicts itself. It's unhistorical. You can make it say whatever you want. And of course, I've learned all these things without ever having read it for myself. I'm taking everybody else's word for it. And so we sit down and start the Bible study. And I interrupt in about 3.4 seconds, and I just blast these guys. And I just ask all the skeptical questions, all the chiding, all the ribbing, all the stuff, and I just bomb these guys. And so they get wiped out, except for this one guy. And I just thought he was a rich businessman that liked to hang out with ball players. I had no clue who he really was. They had just introduced him as Wendell. And Wendell wasn't really impressed. I mean, he looked at me after I had finished my tirade, and he says, finished? And I went, yeah, I'm finished. And he said, wow, the guy said you were smart and you read books, huh? And I said, yeah, I read books. And he says, you know, you asked a lot of questions that I can't answer. And I said, I know. And he said, but you said one thing. You said you want to believe in what's true and what's real that has evidence behind it. And I want to believe in what's true and what's real. And guys, don't you want to believe in what's true and what's real? And they had been practicing. We want to believe in what's true and what's real. And so Wendell turns to me and says, Frank, will you help us? You obviously know a lot more about this kind of stuff than we do, and I just happen to have brought 3 books here, and if you would read these books and then write down where the authors are wrong and just sort of correct it and all of that, we'll get back together again, guys, won't we? That's right. And we'll get together again, and you can share with us everything that you've learned, and then you can enlighten us to what's true and what's real, and then we can become happy and fulfilled, just like you. Now, they didn't say who Wendell was. Wendell, his name is Wendell Dale. He's the National Director of Athletes in Action, the world's largest Christian sports ministry, who had been dealing with overpaid prima donna professional athletes for 20 years. They had just said, Wendell. So Wendell hands me 3 books. And to show that God does indeed have a great sense of humor, in Pittsburgh, of all places, in Pittsburgh, I come to this realization. Jesus Christ was a real historical figure that claimed to be God. He was sentenced to death by both a Roman and a Jewish tribunal. He was sacrificed, crucified, buried in a tomb for 3 days. He rose bodily from the dead, not as a spirit creature, but he rose bodily from the dead, was seen by over 500 people for a period of 40 days, radically changed the lives of 11 cowards to the point where it basically took over the Roman Empire in 3 centuries. And Jesus Christ said that he's coming back and he's ticked, and you better get right or get left. So I became a Christian that afternoon in Pittsburgh. After the game, the guys come in, and there's like 5, 6 Christians on the team, and I go up to Tommy Hume, and remember, he's been trying to share with me since 1979. It's now 1984, right? And he's been trying to share with me, and I go up to him and I said, Hume, I'd really like to get together with the guys. Praise Jesus! And so we go back to the hotel, and sure enough, we meet up in Tommy Hume's room. And they were going to educate me and teach me songs and what it means to be a Christian. Now, I didn't know diddly about churchianity. I just knew that Christianity was true. So we got in the room, and they wanted to say something, and I interrupted, and I said, guys, for 5 years, you've been, quote, trying to share with me. And I've asked you legitimate questions, and because I thought Christianity was false, I never seriously considered it. And I now realize that you guys are in violation of 1 Peter 3:15. It says to sanctify Christ in your hearts, and to every man an answer, a reason for the hope that rests within you, and to do it with gentleness and respect. And I asked you legitimate questions, and my blood was on your hands because you didn't know why you believed what you believed. So now, let's get things straight. When I asked this, you should have said this. And I taught my first class that afternoon. You know, if you're a Christian here, you better know why you believe what you believe. We're in a culture that doesn't believe in truth. We believe that you can create your own reality as you go. We're in a hostile environment. Indeed, we're in Athens. We're not in Jerusalem. And that simply means for all of you to know why you believe what you believe, to be able to give to every man an answer, a reason for the hope that rests within you. If you're not a Christian here, here's the message I have for you. You could reject Jesus Christ for simply wanting to rebel against the holy God you know is present. But don't ever say that Christianity is false, irrational, or does not have the evidence behind it, because when you pursue truth, you will end up at the cross of Jesus Christ, because he is truth incarnate.
Thought that was really good. Here's a few things to note about his speech, right? He said he realized Christianity was true. Well, how did he realize this? Because God revealed it to him. Proverbs 2, 6 through 9 tells us, "For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He's a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He keepeth the paths of judgment, and preserveth the way of the saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path." He said when you pursue truth, you end up at the cross of Jesus Christ. Well, that's John 14:6, one you should be familiar with. Jesus saith unto them, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." He mentioned that his blood was on their hands. That's Ezekiel 33:8. "When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou shalt surely die. If thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity. But his blood will I require at thine hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the wicked of his way to turn from it, and if he turn not his way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul." Lots of scripture embedded in his speech. So what's the point? Secular humanism and biblical worldview? Well, let's stick with the Bible. What does the Bible say? You know, in our lives, we need to filter out. The more we read the Bible, the better filter you're going to have to filter out all the false things we're hearing every single day. The more we're in the Bible, the more we'll realize that. Proverbs 16:25 tells us, "There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." So we must be willing to reach others with the gospel, right? It's us. There's people we can reach that pastor can't. You know, people that only that we can reach through the gospel. So that's what I have for today, but I have a few extra minutes. So next week we're going to do cosmic humanism. That's kind of like the New Age movement. But let's see, who was willing to do some trivia? I got some.